Every time a young horse does a showcase sprint at events like the Ocala Breeders Sale in Florida, it's a disaster waiting to happen. This week it happened. A young horse died on a track, a jockey was injured, and a PETA investigator was assaulted and robbed by the management for documenting the horror. The story next on the PETA Podcast with Emil, Guillermo. Welcome to the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil, Guillermo, your host for this inside look at animal rights, brought to you by PETA, the largest animal rights organization in the world. On today's episode, sales auctions like the Ocala Breeders Sale is part of a horse racing tradition that the public rarely sees, but showcasing the young horses in a sprint to potential buyers is one of the more dangerous things a horse is asked to do. This week it happened. A young horse asked to race too soon broke down, the jockey thrown and injured. When a PETA investigator filmed the sprint and the breakdown, the investigator was allegedly assaulted by the president of the Ocala Breeders Sale, Tom Ventura, and a staff member. A police complaint has been filed. PETA Senior VP Kathy Guillermo talks about what happened at Ocala and why activism is needed to stop this dangerous practice on this edition of the PETA Podcast. So it sounds like this could happen at any time when you have young horses running at a breeding sale like this.
This is something that's very specific to these auctions of specifically the 2-year-old thoroughbreds. And I think it's important to note that when the thoroughbred industry, when the racing industry calls a horse a 2-year-old, that horse may actually only be 21, 22, 23 months old, because in the thoroughbred world, January 1st is considered the birthday. So we're talking about very, very young horses who are going to be put up for auction to the highest bidder, and they are made to race incredibly fast. And perhaps I shouldn't call it a race. It's a single horse going around a track, but running so fast, faster than they would ever run again in any race in the future, a very short distance, 1 furlong or 1/8 of a mile. And these are horses who are so young, they're not used to being on the track. Their bones are not fully developed. They're skittish, they're nervous, and they've probably been put through kind of a horrendous training to get them to this point, and it's incredibly dangerous.
Now they're running against a clock too. That's what's getting them, that's their motivation, right? They're running against time.
Well, I wouldn't accuse any thoroughbred buyers of being incredibly, I don't want to accuse them of not being smart, but let's just say that when a 2-year-old horse in this way runs very fast, prospective buyers will pay a lot more money for them, even though there's actually no correlation between that speed at these auctions, so-called under tax shows, and the success of the horse later in life. And in fact, the horses are often so damaged by this process, they can't begin racing when they normally would.
All right, so this is a showcase of the horse, and this week it happened. I mean, the threat is always there when you have a young horse who's racing so fast, but it happened this week where a horse broke down through a jockey, and PETA captured it on film.
Yes, we first began exposing these, what the jockeys call suicide races, more than a decade ago. And we have worked diligently to try to get the industry to change it. I think it's important to say that because there are so many people in racing who are opposed to this now. We have made progress, but the bottom line is that these auction companies are not willing to give up these deadly sprints because it makes more money. What happened this week was a very young horse called Froston was put on a track for one of these sprints. And you can see very clearly in the video footage that that Ocala Breeders Sales, the auction company, took, that the horse came around the first curve, the jockey applied the whip, the jockey hit him, and he jumped a bit to the left, and he appeared to think that he needed to jump over the rail because these are very inexperienced horses. So he made a move as though he's going to leap that rail on the inside of the track, and instead crashed into it, went down. The jockey went down, lay motionless on the ground. The horse went down and couldn't get up. We had an investigator at the sale who was filming this, and he went down to where the horse was, and he filmed them actually euthanizing the horse. They killed the horse because the injury was so serious.
And what happened to the jockey? The jockey was thrown.
The jockey was thrown, and in the video that the Ocala Breeders Sale auction company took, you can see the jockey's not moving. The jockey is lying on the ground next to the horse who's lying on the ground. And we don't know what happened. We have not seen any update on what has happened to the jockey. Of course, our investigator was then confronted by the president of the auction company and one of his henchmen, who basically assaulted him and tried to detain him unlawfully. So we were not able to stay to see what happened with the jockey, and no one is saying a word about it so far.
Yeah, but a police complaint has been filed against the Ocala Breeders Sale's president, Tom Ventura, and maybe a staff member?
That's right, because this was assault and battery and theft and unlawful detainment. And last I heard, those are all felonies. So we were certainly down at the Ocala Police Department filing a complaint. The officers there took it very seriously, and we'll see what happens from here. But it's very clear to us these men need to be prosecuted.
And there's going to be no doubt that this is going to be something pursued by PETA.
Well, on all fronts, because I think, first of all, we need to present this to the industry and to the public as yet more evidence that these are dangerous races, that these are dangerous sprints that they put these horses through. There's really no need for it. They could stop them tomorrow. And we've, in fact, made a proposal about what they could do instead so that they could still showcase these horses without putting their lives in danger.
So what would happen if these under tax shows, these races with these young horses, if they were to magically go away? How would it affect the racing industry?
I don't think it would have any effect at all if both of the auction companies stopped them immediately, because then you simply wouldn't see these horses who are being forced to race or to run so quickly, and they would have to do something resembling horsemanship, where they look at the conformation of the horse. Perhaps they take a horse through a light gallop, and that would be it. The only effect would be that jockeys' lives would not be endangered, and the horses themselves would not be endangered. And that would be a good thing.
And it would be the elimination of maybe one of the more dangerous things that a horse is asked to do in its career, really.
Yes. And, these under tax shows and these sprints that they put these horses through have been the subject of a great deal of discussion lately in the horse racing industry itself. And there's been talk about whether or not the Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Authority should oversee these sales and these auctions and the sprints that occur before them, which clearly I think they need to be doing. And there's been a lot of discussion about the drugs that are used to get the horses to run so quickly when they have to do this furlong.
Now, there's no indication that the horse was drugged at all, or that would explain any kind of erratic behavior, was there?
There's no indication of that, and I really have no idea. I think the horse looked very inexperienced, not knowing how to navigate a track, or perhaps even what the rail was, perhaps even what the whip was. Because here's a horse who's not even 2 years old, who's not racing, who's being hit with a stick in this way, probably never has been before in his life.
Now, what do you say to people who say, this isn't a big deal, this is just, this is a common practice in horse racing, and shouldn't PETA be looking at the bigger picture with the Kentucky Derby coming up and all the big Triple Crown races coming up in May?
We're looking at that as well. But I think we have to look at every bit of this industry where horses are suffering and dying. There's no excuse for it in any area. But when you look at these sprints that they do, these suicide races, as they call them, or suicide shows, then you can clearly see how utterly pointless it is. So if you start at the very beginning of a horse's life and you trace all the cruelty from the beginning to the end, you have to begin with the preparation for these sprints, and then you move on to the actual racing itself, and you move through to the point where the horse may go to auction and may go to slaughter. All of those areas have to be dealt with. There isn't one that's worse than the other. They're all resulting in the deaths of horses and in the suffering of horses.
All right. So what can they do instead? What can they do instead of these so-called undertax shows?
PETA has made a proposal to the racing industry. We presented it to the heads of Ocala Breeders Sale, to Mr. Tom Ventura, who assaulted our investigator today, has received our proposal some months back. We presented it to the head of Fasig-Tipton, and we've shared it with many leaders in the racing industry. It's online if people want to see it at PETA.org. Essentially, what we're suggesting is that they stop these sprints altogether in these spring sales of 2-year-olds and instead move a sales or add a bonus sale in the fall, where the horses have then been through training and could do a 4 or 5 furlong race rather than this kind of silly speed test, which is no predictor whatsoever of how a horse is going to do. By the time fall has arrived, these animals they're used to being on the track. They've had some training. They have some understanding of what's expected of them. And it's a distance that is so much more humane than that very short furlong run.
What prevents them from taking that kind of action?
Their own stupidity, basically. We've had people in the industry tell us that this is a good idea. We've suggested that this year they simply add the fall sale. It could be done at a racetrack where the horse is used to being. And it would be a great way to test what we believe is the perfect solution within the racing industry's own world. I mean, obviously, the best thing to do would be to stop breeding and selling these horses for racing. But if they're going to have auctions, they need to do it in a way that doesn't kill the own product they're trying to sell.
We have these undertax sales, and we have this one instance. The video is available for people to see on the PETA website. I saw it. It's pretty horrifying to watch.
It's a shocking death of a horse for no good reason at all. And I have heard from people who have purchased horses at these auctions, these young 2-year-old horses, and they've gone through this sprint. And the horses are, they're burnt out. They haven't even been on a racetrack to actually do a race. And they have been so burnt out by the process of preparing for the sale that sometimes they take 6 or 7 months to recover from the auction itself, which is just crazy. It's just craziness that this is the way it's happening in this world.
So this is at the beginning of a young racehorse's life, these breeders' sales and these dangerous sprints. If a horse's career advances as expected and they are fast and victorious, they qualify for the Triple Crown. And we have the biggest race of the year, the Kentucky Derby, coming up in May. What is PETA doing in terms of the Kentucky Derby?
Well, to get to the point where a horse could even be considered for the Kentucky Derby, and I think, of course, that's what every auction buyer is hoping. They go to the Ocala Breeders Sale, they go to a Fasig-Tipton auction, and they're hoping to buy a horse who is going to end up winning the Triple Crown. That's everybody's dream. So before they get to that point, and I just feel I need to say that 25% of the horses who are actually signed up to take part in these sprints are scratched before that date comes. And that is likely because the training has been so harsh. So this is by way of saying it is a long road before anybody can even think about winning the Kentucky Derby. They have to survive this part of their lives first, the part before they ever start racing. And then, as we know, last year at the Churchill Downs track where the Kentucky Derby is held, there were, I believe it was 12 horses who died on the track, either in racing or in training, in the couple of weeks leading up to the Derby, through Derby week and the few days after it. There were deaths at Belmont. There was a death at Preakness. There were deaths for the summer season at Saratoga Springs racetrack in New York. It was pretty much a killing field last Triple Crown season. PETA has made its position very clear. The racing industry has not done enough to protect these horses. And we have a list of 12 easy things that they can do in order to make this world a little bit safer for the animals who are used in it. But last year, when we saw so many horses die, we insisted that Churchill Downs be shut down while they investigate these deaths. And in fact, that is what happened. The conclusions that were reached was that there were a number of reasons why the horses died. Yet the headline surrounding that was no single cause for deaths of horses. So the first thing that has to happen, and that we insist on, is racing has to acknowledge it has a mortality problem. It's killing horses in a way that is completely unacceptable to the American public. And the next thing it has to do is prevent those deaths. And it needs to stop pretending it doesn't know how to do that. The first thing that it can do is get sophisticated CT scanning equipment into these racetracks. We have been advocating for this for some years. There's a technology that needs a year-long study, and then it would be ready for use in discerning whether or not a horse has an injury that could lead to a breakdown. So there are steps that must be taken beginning with that. And we have got to see these tracks take that step, or their industry is frankly going to go where it belongs if they can't protect the horses, which is down the tubes.
And so today's mishap, the tragedy of the horse dying, it just sort of pinpoints how horse racing is cruel and it is unnecessary.
You know, today I saw a tweet from somebody. I'm not sure if they still call them tweets, but a comment on X after somebody viewed our videotape of this horse, this young horse, Froston, terrified clearly, crashing into the rail, unable to get up, and then being euthanized, and how he struggles against the euthanasia solution that's being put into his body. This is a horse that's not even 2 years old. And the person said on this X comment, PETA just sends out investigators to dig up dirt. And I thought, no, racing makes it so easy. Basically, all we have to do is walk into a track. This auction is a public event. Anybody can go into it. Lots of people are taking videotape because they're looking at buying horses. Anytime we walk onto a track, we're likely to see a horse die. And so, yeah, I think racing has a real issue. It has a cruelty issue and it has a death issue. And I think they were somewhat taken aback at last year's Kentucky Derby when the public and the media erupted in outrage that horses were dying, because to so many people, not everybody, there are some people in racing who are trying to deal with this, but to so many people in racing, it's collateral damage. It's livestock. It's the way things happen. We have a public that's not willing to take that anymore.
Do you think the death of Froston this week will have any impact on seeing the cruelty end in racing?
Yes, I do, because the shock, the horror of seeing a horse die in this way is cumulative. We have so much video of it now because, as I say, we can go just about anywhere and find it. It's not like, as much as obviously Tom Ventura was trying to keep it hidden today at Ocala, but they can't hide it. So yes, every time there is a death like this, and every time we put that video out there publicly and we make it available online for people to see, the heart, the collective heart of the public hardens a little bit more against racing. And that's what they've got to understand.
And that's our show for today, a special edition because of the breaking news and because we're also on the road. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to send a link of this show to your friends. Tell them you like the PETA podcast. Contact us at PETA.org, where you can see the video of that breakdown at the Ocala Breeders Sale. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Emil Amok, EMILAMOK, or see my vlog at amok.com, or see my work at ALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund. That's ALDEF, AALDEF.org/blog. Or see my one-man show, Emil Amok, Lost NPR host, and other Amok monologues at the New York City Fringe Festival. That's this month until April 21st. Or go to frigid.nyc and look for Emil Amok. That's FRIGID.NYC. And look for Emil Amok. Also, the Orlando Fringe Festival. I'll be there in May. And get this podcast on YouTube at Emil Amok 1, EMIL AMOK 1. Once again, thank you for listening. Check out all our episodes on your favorite podcast app or on Apple Podcasts, where you can subscribe to as well as rate and review the show. It helps get the word out about the issues you care about. Our music is provided by Carbonworks. Check them out on YouTube. And join us again next time for more insight into animal rights and the fight for a cruelty-free world on the PETA Podcast. I'm Emil Guillermo.